The night Elena Voss was cast out of Thornridge Pack, the snow fell so thick that the trees looked like ghosts standing guard along the border. She walked without chains, without guards, because no one believed an Omega like her would try to run. Running required hope, and hope had been taken from her long before this night. The council had made the decision 3 days earlier, in a meeting she was not invited to attend. Word had reached her through whispers in the kitchen, through the way the other wolves stopped talking when she entered a room. Thornridge needed peace with the neighboring territory. Peace required a gesture, and an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack, the one nobody would miss, was gesture enough. Elena did not cry when they told her. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing in Thornridge. She only asked one question. Why me? The Alpha's second, a broad man named Corwin, who had never once looked at her with kindness, answered without hesitation. Because you are no one. Sacrificing no one costs the pack nothing. Those words stayed with her as she walked into the dark, past the border markers, into land that belonged to no pack she knew. The cold bit through her thin coat within minutes. By the time she could no longer feel her hands, she understood that Thornridge had not sent her away to survive. They had sent her away to disappear. She fell to her knees somewhere beneath a frozen ridge, and the last thing she remembered was the sound of snow crunching under heavy paws, circling closer, and a pair of golden eyes watching her from the tree line before the world went dark. When Elena opened her eyes again, she was warm. The warmth confused her more than anything else. She lay beneath thick furs in a stone room lit by firelight, and for a moment, she believed she had died, and this was some strange afterlife, reserved for wolves who meant nothing. Then a voice spoke from the shadows near the hearth, low and even, carrying an authority she had never heard in Thornridge. You should be dead. She turned her head slowly. A man stood there, tall and still, his dark eyes studying her the way a scholar studies a puzzle that refuses to make sense. He introduced himself only as Kale, and Elena would later learn that this simple name belonged to a king whose bloodline most wolves believed had vanished from the world generations ago. The Lycans. Not pack wolves bound by ordinary rules, but something older, rarer, governed by laws written before Thornridge's founders were even born. Kale explained little that first night, only that his hunters had found her nearly frozen at the border, and that something about her scent had made him order she be brought inside, rather than left to the snow. No Omega survives exposure that severe, he said, more to himself than to her. Elena had no answer for that. She had never understood why her body ran warmer than it should, why cold that killed other wolves only ever left her weak instead of dead. In Thornridge, this had made her strange, another mark against her. Here, it made her a mystery worth solving. The weeks that followed changed everything Elena believed about herself. The Lycans lived apart from ordinary pack politics, hidden in mountain territory, protected by old wards and older secrets. Kale allowed her to stay while his advisors quietly investigated her bloodline, and what they found unsettled the entire court. Buried in her lineage was a suppressed thread of Lycan blood, deliberately hidden, deliberately weakened across generations. Someone in Thornridge's history had gone to great lengths to bury this truth. Elena had spent her whole life being told she was worthless, when in fact, some part of her had been hidden away like a threat. Kale's second in command, a sharp-eyed woman named Isolde, did not trust her at first. An Omega walking into Lycan halls, claiming ancient blood, seemed too convenient to believe. Prove it, Isolde said one morning, watching Elena struggle through her first real combat lesson. Elena did not have the strength yet to prove anything, but she had something else. She had the refusal to quit. Every time she was knocked down in the training yard, she stood again, even when her legs shook, even when Isolde's expression suggested she expected Elena to stay on the ground. Kale watched these lessons more often than his duties required. He told himself it was because he needed to understand what she was capable of before deciding what to do with her. But he began to notice things beyond her bloodline. The careful way she thanked servants who owed her nothing, the way she flinched at raised voices, a small habit that told him more about her old pack than any report ever could. The quiet steel underneath her exhaustion, the refusal to let Thornridge's cruelty define what she would become. One evening, months into her stay, Elena found him alone on the highest balcony of the stone hall, looking out over the mountains. She had not meant to speak so honestly, but the words came anyway. "They did not send me away because peace required it," she said. "They sent me away because getting rid of me cost them nothing. That is what an Omega is, someone whose absence changes nothing." Kale turned to her, and for once his composed expression slipped. "That is not true here," he said. "Your absence would change quite a lot." Elena did not know what to do with the way those words settled in her chest, warm in a place that had been cold for years. She was careful not to trust it too quickly. Kindness in Thornridge had always come with conditions. But Kale's kindness, she began to notice, never asked anything of her in return. As her training progressed, Elena learned of the trials of blood and frost, an ancient rite required of any wolf who wished to stand beside the Lycan king as equal, not simply as guest. The trials tested more than strength. They tested whether a wolf's spirit could survive facing every wound it had ever carried, laid bare before the court. Isolde warned her plainly. "Many stronger wolves than you have failed the trials, not because their bodies broke, but because their hearts did." Elena thought of the council meeting she was never invited to attend. She thought of Corwin's voice calling her no one. She wondered if her heart could survive facing that truth out loud, in front of strangers, without breaking. The night of the trials arrived beneath a sky heavy with stars. Elena stood in the center of the frozen courtyard, surrounded by Lycans who had never accepted an outsider standing there before. The first trial demanded physical endurance, and Elena's body, hardened by months of training, carried her through it, bruised but standing. The second trial demanded she face challengers in combat, testing not her skill alone but her will to keep rising after every fall. She fell more than once. Each time, she remembered Corwin's words, and each time, she used them as fuel rather than poison, standing again before the count finished. The third trial was the one Isolde had warned her about. It required no physical strength at all. Elena was made to speak, before the entire court, the truth of what had been done to her. Not a polished story. The real one. The nights she went hungry while higher-ranked wolves feasted. The years she was told her survival meant nothing. The final walk into the snow, meant to end in her death, meant to erase her so completely that no one would remember her name. Her voice shook as she spoke it. She did not hide the shame Thornridge had taught her to feel, the shame of being unwanted. But somewhere in the telling, her voice steadied, because she realized, standing there, that she was not asking Thornridge's permission to matter anymore. She was simply stating a fact. "I was left to freeze. I did not die. I am here." When she finished, the courtyard was silent. Then Kale stepped forward, and before the assembled Lycans, he placed the crown of the Lycan queen upon her head, sealing what the trials had already proven. Elena Voss, the Omega with no rank, no value, no name worth remembering, stood transformed, not because Kale had chosen her, but because she had chosen, again and again, not to disappear. Word of a new power rising beyond the border reached Thornridge slowly, being carried by traders and wandering wolves who spoke of a Lycan queen with quiet strength, and a story too strange to be entirely fiction. Corwin dismissed the rumors at first. Omegas did not become queens. It was not how the world worked, not in any pack he understood. But Thornridge's fortunes had worsened since Elena's exile. The peace bought with her sacrifice had crumbled within a year, and enemies who once respected Thornridge's borders grew bolder, testing weaknesses the pack could no longer hide. Desperate, the council sent emissaries toward Blackfang territory, the same land where Elena had once been left to freeze, hoping to renew old alliances before the pack collapsed entirely. They did not expect to find Lycan wolves guarding that border now. They certainly did not expect to be led, under careful watch, into a stone hall, where a queen sat beside a king, whose bloodline they had believed extinct. Elena recognized Corwin the moment he entered. Age had worn lines into his face that had not been there before, and his eyes widened with a fear he tried and failed to hide when he understood who sat upon the throne across from him. "You," he said, the word escaping before he could stop it. Elena did not raise her voice. She did not need to anymore. "Yes," she said. "Me." The council members shifted uneasily. aware suddenly that the fate of their entire pack rested in the hands of the Omega they had discarded. Elena watched them wait for her judgment, watched fear replace the contempt they once wore so easily around her. And for a moment, something old and bitter rose in her chest, a wish to make them feel exactly as small as they had made her feel. She did not act on it. Instead, she asked for the truth. Why was my bloodline hidden? Why was I sent away, instead of simply told what I was? The oldest council member, a woman named Petra, who had sat on Thornridge's council longer than Elena had been alive, finally answered, her voice trembling. Your bloodline carried a claim older than the current council's authority. If it had been known, if you had been trained instead of buried, you would have held a rightful place above them. Exile was not about peace. It was about protecting power that was never rightfully theirs to hold. The truth settled over the hall, heavier than any punishment Elena could have chosen. Thornridge had not simply thrown away someone they saw as worthless. They had buried a threat to the very foundation of their authority, dressed in the convenient excuse of an unwanted Omega. Elena could have destroyed them in that moment. The Lycan court beneath her, the power of her crown, gave her every right. But she thought of the girl who had walked into the snow, believing she deserved nothing better, and she chose instead to become someone that girl would have been proud of. She did not offer Thornridge Pack destruction. She offered them correction. The stolen authority would be returned to its rightful line, her line, though she had no interest in ruling a pack that had once left her to die. Instead, she named a new leadership loyal to truth rather than fear. Wolves who would answer to the same principles the Lycan court now lived by. Corwin and the council who orchestrated her exile were stripped of their positions, not through violence, but through the same laws they had once twisted to erase her. The border where Elena had once collapsed in the snow became, months later, the site of a formal gathering between both territories, an alliance built on honesty instead of convenient cruelty. Elena stood at its center, no longer an Omega with no name worth remembering, but a queen whose name both packs would carry forward. Kale stood beside her as always, watching the woman he had found half frozen become someone entire kingdoms now looked to for guidance. He did not need to say how proud he was. She could see it plainly enough in the quiet way he watched her, the same way he had watched her rise every single time she was knocked down in that training yard, months and months ago. That night, standing once more upon the frozen ridge where her old life had ended, Elena felt something she had never expected to feel in this place. Not grief, not fear, only a quiet, settled peace, the kind that comes from finally understanding that the worst moment of your life does not have to be the last word on who you are. She had been left to freeze beyond the border. She had returned wearing a crown, and beneath it, a heart that had learned, at last, exactly how much she was worth.